Well, hi, everybody. This is Dr. Schroeder with our introduction to week number 3 of our class in the Principles of Healthcare Research. Well, once again, I had a very good discussion in week number 2. Of course, the primary focus of the discussion this week was very straightforward. Essentially, you were asked to identify differences between primary and secondary sources of literature, which is important when we're looking at evidence-based practice because, of course, we should only be using and only be referring to evidence, at least for the major basis of our decisions and what is the best practice. We should use information that has been vetted by uh, truly valid sources and that represents research that is clearly, high quality and has been reviewed by some expert researchers. And that's, of course, the main idea that we get across when we talk about peer-reviewed literature. And you described and discussed some of the places where you would find the peer-reviewed literature. The best place, quite frankly, is just right here with the class, is from the SHU library. The library has the peer-reviewed databases through EBSCO and CINAHL and PubMed, and that is almost always a place that you can go and rely on getting good peer-reviewed literature. And the second part of your question focused on the how to write a research question. And each of you selected or chose a topic that you thought would be an interesting subject of research. And that's always really the first step of the research process, is kind of coming up with that topic. Identified a problem, and then from that problem you identified what would be the appropriate research question. And of course, as I said last week, and as the feedback throughout the class that I've given, what determines whether you use a qualitative or quantitative methodology is not really the topic. It is very possible, and in fact, there's a lot of research that reviews information that is really quite subjective and would lend itself to a qualitative study. But remember, whenever you're trying to seek a cause-effect relationship or trying to show that one variable has a impact or an effect on another, that always refuses quantitative methodology. You can't do that with a qualitative study. A qualitative study, in its most general sense, is a study methodology that we use when we are just looking to find out more information about something. The analogy that I like to use is a quantitative study is like a court hearing. Where if you have ever been to court or ever seen a court procedure, the attorney will come up and he will give evidence, and he won't accuse anybody of anything, but he will just basically state the evidence. Something as simple as there was a gun at the crime scene, and there was a victim at the crime scene, and the gun was missing a bullet, and the gun was smoking, and there was a fingerprint on the gun, and then the fingerprint belonged to the individual over here, the defendant. And therefore, the logical conclusion that you make from that is that the defendant picked up that gun, pulled the trigger, and was the one that shot whoever. And that's kind of like how a court case goes. That's really what a quantitative study is all about. You're making very deductive logic decisions based on the evidence that you have, and there's no room for any opinion or feelings. It's all very cut and dried, very cold. And a qualitative study, on the other hand, is more like a documentary. If you've ever been to a documentary movie where at the beginning of the documentary, the filmmaker will say, gee whiz, I've been really curious about, what it is like for, the African-American population living in the South. So let's go take our cameras and go down and look. And let's go talk to people and find out what information we can find. And then, they go on a series of interviews and talking to people and doing focus groups and tries to come up with a good idea of what the flavor is about the topic that they're studying. And that is a very valid form of research, but you can't use it to prove anything. Even if you get 100 people in the same room to state that they think that and they believe and they feel that something is true, you can't really extrapolate that to a larger population, and you can't prove anything with it. And as I've also said, try to remember that when you're doing studies, we don't really use the term prove anywhere in a study. No study is meant to prove anything. Each study is one more piece of nursing knowledge, one more piece in the chain of nursing literature. And if you get enough studies together and get enough evidence together, that will point you to some logical conclusions about what the best practice is about a given problem or given topic. And that brings us to week number 3. In week number 3, you're going to be talking about what are the sort of study purposes that we would find, and what do we mean when we use terms like rigor and validity. And again, this is different in qualitative and quantitative studies. We're going to be referring back to our studies again, a qualitative and a quantitative study. And you're going to be going back to the Beck and the Kolkalba articles and talking about the lack of hypotheses and the absence of independent dependent variables in the Beck article. Is that really right? Is it right to do that here? Or did Beck maybe make a mistake? Or what were the variables in the Kolkalba et al. Study? And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. And that's what the discussion is going to be focused on this week. You also will have assignments this week. I'm reviewing right here your, oh gosh, I have to go back and I have to look at your class here. Really, all that we have this week, continuing on, is really at this point is just your week 3 discussion, and that's really the primary. That's going to be your assignment this week. And as always, your initial response will be due back by Wednesday, with feedback to your peers due by Saturday. And I'll be chiming in. Look for me to start participating usually around Wednesday after a few people have posted, and I can post some various questions and post some sometimes pointed questions to kind of sort of get you thinking and get discussion going. But the discussion has been very good, very robust. Everybody, I think, is really pretty much hitting the nail on the head. And so I would say, well done. Class, you're doing excellent. Look for your grades for week 2 to be done sometime by the end of this week. I really just have the discussions to grade, and they don't take a whole lot of time, so I'm hoping to have them done possibly by Tuesday or Wednesday. Although if it's later in the week, I'm personally in the middle of a move, and I'm moving right now, so if I'm having difficulty with my internet connection, or if I'm having difficulty just, yeah, if you've ever moved, you know what it's like. But I will be in class, and I will be participating, and you will definitely get your grading and your feedback by the end of the week. Of course, as always, feel free to leave me any messages. Feel free to ask me any questions. I'll be participating right along in group with you. I look forward to another great discussion, and we'll see you in class.